Alright guys, so we have now been working in Maya for a little bit now, a couple weeks. So I kind of want to just keep moving around the program a little bit, just kind of give you guys some experience in a few areas of Maya. So one of the things I specifically want to look at today is going to be the outliner. We've talked about that a little bit and how you can use that to really organize your scenes, to create groups and good naming conventions and keep a clean workflow. We're going to actually look at that a little bit more because there's some other things you can even do with it. So we'll take a look at that. Again, we'll review lighting and rendering and how to get things once you have an animation, how you get that out of Maya. So and again, we'll probably look at setting a couple keyframes and things like that. Alright, so first thing off, we always want to make sure when we're doing our modeling and things like that, that we want to make sure that we're in the modeling menu. So make sure, first off, make sure that's set to modeling. The next thing I want us to do is let's go ahead and create, again, I want to make sure that you guys are coming down to polygon primitives. Not that there's anything wrong with or NURBS primitives or anything like that, but really most of your work is going to be with polygon primitives. So let's go ahead and drop down a cube. So again, we're just going to come up to create, down to polygon primitives, and over, and we're just going to create a cube. And it'll pop right there in the middle of our scene. And you can see over here, we actually have our P cube 1. Now, one thing we can do is making sure over here we have our different menus, like our attribute editor. We have our P cube 1 shape, our P cube 1, and this will affect many of the things with our P cubes. So just keep that in mind. We can look at how many subdivisions we have in here. I'm just going to keep this pretty basic for right now, just keeping it at 1. But just remember that you do have all this, so you can set certain amounts of subdivision on your different axes. Okay, but let's not hang out in our attribute editor right now. Let's go over here, all the way to the right. You'll see that where that word channel box and layer editor. Click on the word layer editor right over there, and we'll go over here to our layer editors, and we've talked about our display layers and all that sort of stuff too. So from here, let's duplicate this cube. So we can just go to edit and down to so let's go to edit and over here to duplicate, and again you can see there's a shortcut from that, so you can just click Control D. So from here I'm just going to click Control D, and over here we'll see that now we have P cube 1 and P cube 2. We can't really tell the difference because they're actually sitting right on top of each other. So if I over here select my move tool and I just move it, let's and I'm looking right over here, I can see what axes I'm looking at. So the red is the x-axis, and the blue is the z-axis, and the y is the green. So I'm just going to grab the red and move this along the x-axis. So we can move this, let's just move it out 2. So we can manually move it, or over here, remember, we can just do 2. Let's click on that again. We can do Control D, and we can move this out another 2. So we could do 4. Now we can continue to do that, but that could take a while if we want to keep duplicating these and making, another 4 or another 2. Duplicate that again, and then we can make this to 8. But that can take a minute. So another way that we can do that, I mean, there's nothing wrong with doing it manually, but sometimes knowing a few tricks just speed up your workflow is always nice too. So I'm going to delete those, and here I'm just going to click on that. I'm going to come back up to Edit. I'm going to come down to Duplicate Special, and I'm going to click the box next to it. So we saw that 2 seemed like a good number, so we could put 2 here on our X. So remember, so this is our translate, so we're going to translate over on X. Remember, it's X, Y, and then Z is our third dimension. So that's X, Y, and Z. All these are going to be, so scale on the X, Y, Z, rotate around the X, Y, Z, and that sort of stuff. Right now we only have 1 copy, but let's say if we set that to, let's set it to like 25. Now if we click Duplicate Special, you can see we've got a lot here. And so that's one way that we can speed that up quite a bit. Okay, so one of the things that I wanted to look at today, though, is our outliner over here and how that can be used. Well, one of the ways that rigging is done is through you can use the outliner for part of that. And so we're actually going to look not so much at rigging, but to understand how things are organized and how things are parented and that sort of stuff, and what that means. So, and when I say parented, basically what I'm going to do here is I'm going to take this p cube 2 and I'm going to parent that to p cube 1. So the way I'm going to do that, well, there's a couple ways we could do that. One, I can click p cube 2 right here, and remember we can actually click out here and select things, so we could get p cube 14, or we can also click it in here. So if I wanted p cube 21, I can select things from in here as well. So let's, for right now, let's select p cube 2, and let's shift, so holding shift down, select p cube 1. So we click p cube 2 first, and then shift selected p cube 1. Now, if we hit P, as in Paul, on the keyboard, that will actually parent that. And you're going to see this little plus sign because you don't see p cube 2 in here anymore. So if we open up that little plus sign, we're going to see p cube 2. So now I could select p cube 3 and shift select p cube 2 and hit P as in Paul to parent. And now there's another plus sign by p cube 2. And if we open it up now, we can see p cube 3. So what I'm doing here is I'm going right down the line and I'm parenting. So p cube 4 is going to be parented to p cube 3. And this is actually how bones in rigging work. And there's actually some draw lines when you actually get into rigs and joints and things like that, that you'll see once you parent things. But don't worry about any of that yet. I just kind of want you guys to have the concept of how you can use the outliner for some things. So another way that I can parent, so if I wanted to parent p cube 4 to p cube 3, I can use my middle mouse button, and if I click and hold, I can drag p cube 4 right on top of p cube 3. And now you can see there's a little plus sign for that. And I can drag, so by using middle mouse, I can drag right onto what I want parented. So in order to have this exposure continue to go in order, we continually have to hit the plus signs to open things up. So I'll drag p cube 6 onto p cube 5, but I have to open up p cube 5 so that I can parent p cube 6 or p cube 7 to p cube 6, and so on. Now there is a point here, and hang with me while we get the rest of these parented. So we're just going to do this real quick. So either way, you can drag or you can click and shift click and then just hit P as in Paul. Okay, so just bear with me real quick while I get all these parented up, but you guys should have the concept of how to parent things together. The reason I'm showing you this is there is a motion graphics technique that you can actually use here when parenting things together. So I just want you guys to be aware of the outliner and some things that it can do. Get all this parented up. Oops. Get that open. So you got to make sure you keep opening the plus sign so you can see the last P cube. Now we're kind of running out of space here, so I'm just going to, for right now, if I hover over the side there, you'll see like the double arrow split, and I can kind of make the outliner a little bit bigger because it was getting a little narrow and hard to see things. So you can drag that over just by, again, hovering your mouse right over there, and you should get a double arrow pointing left and right, and then you can drag this over. And we'll squish it back here in a second, but this will just allow us to see what we're doing. Okay, now that we've got all this parented up, I'm just going to go ahead and squish all that back. Now, we have these cubes that are all parented in order going this way. So this cube right here is parented to that cube. And if you notice, if I click off and I click this cube, well, both of them highlight up. And if I click, like, say, this cube, we're going to notice everything after is going to be highlighted up. So what I mean by that is if I move this cube, I'm actually going to move everything after. I'm going to hit Control Z. Or here, if I click this cube, I'm going to move all the cubes after it, and so on. And if I click the first one, everything gets moved together. So the outliner can be used to organize things. Again, so if we wanted to organize this whole thing into a group, we could go to Edit, Group, and we could just call this our cube parents. And then we can click that plus sign and oh, I'm going to have to click all these to get them back open so we can see the whole thing. Okay, so I just went through and did that real quick. So how does this work in conjunction, and what is the reason outside of rigging that we might want to do something like this? Well, one, again, organization, because we can collapse that and have everything organized. This whole parent to child link can be all organized in one group folder, keeping our scene nice and tidy. The other reason, if I click PCube1 and I come over here and I shift click the very last one, so if I click again, if I click the first one and then come to the end and I shift click, I'll get all of these selected. Or I can also out here just drag a box around everything and I can select everything. So with everything selected, a fun thing that you can do is click your rotation tool, and if we just rotate along the X, you're going to see everything kind of rotate together. So you can see you can start to do some very interesting designs and work. So you can start to rotate this different directions, and you can get some very interesting behavior and some very interesting looks. Now rotation isn't the only thing. I mean, we can do our move tool, right? So we can kind of move all these together, or I can Control Z this. Another thing we could even look at is scaling. So we can start to look at these big cubes all scaling down one by one until we get to this very tiny cube. So there's some very interesting things that you could do with this, and keep in mind we've only used cubes, so you can use really any shape that you want. And then another fun thing is we can animate this as well. So let's take a look at an animation sequence. So let me just undo some of this. So if we wanted this guy say maybe to start like this. Remember, all we have to do is make sure we're on frame 1 in our time slider, and we just hit the letter S as in Sam. Okay, so again, just by hitting the letter S as in Sam, that stands for set key, we can see this little red tick right here. There's actually things that we could do with it if you did not like that keyframe. Just making sure that where we are on the time slider is right on top of that. I can actually right click and I can go up to cut if I did not like that key, and that'll disappear. So let me show that again. So I'm going to just hit S. I'm going to right click and come all the way up here to the top and click cut. Okay. So if you didn't like your keyframe, that is how you can clear your keyframe. So again, let's hit S. Now I'm going to drag all the way to the end of the time slider, and I'm going to do, again over here, I'm going to go to the rotation, or as we pointed out before, Q, the QWERTY up in the left hand corner of your keyboard right under your numbers. Q is going to be your main selection. W is going to bring us down to our move. E is rotate, and R is scale. So Q, W, E, R is our shortcuts for these. So if you see me over here and I just pop back and forth, if you just watch over here in the left as my mouse is out here, you can see Q. You can see that's highlighted. W, move tools highlighted. E, rotation, and R is scale. So it's kind of that QWERTY kind of reference. So anyways, so making sure that we are all the way at the end of our timeline here at 120, and we could actually stretch that out here if we wanted to. I don't want to really make more frames than we really need to. I mean, we could put 500, we could put 1,000, we could do whatever and shrink this down, but I'm just going to keep this at 120 as our cap. So, because that just gives us a few frames to work with for now, but that's how you set your frame range and all that sort of stuff. And then this number right here is actually where we're at in the time slider. So I could manually move it, or I can move it around that way too. So just going to go to 120. And let's set some keyframes. So I'm going to scale this guy up. I'm going to hit E on the keyboard to get this rotation. Just kind of play around with different things until I get something that I like. It's kind of cool, and it has that very drilling-like effect. And remember, we can also scale on axes, so we can scale, we don't have to scale just all of them together, which would be that middle guy, but we can squeeze on one axis or another, so that's always something you can play around with too. Oops. Sorry, I accidentally clicked something, and it actually just sent me into edge mode. So this is kind of good too. So just remember, if you hold your right click mouse button down, we get all these, our vertices, so we could select all that. But right now I'm just wanting to operate in object mode. So just go back to object mode, and I'm just, oops, there. Get us off of our vertex object mode. And I'm just going to drag a box around all that again, and that just allows me to select everything that's parented. Alright, and since we're here, let's go ahead and just hit a keyframe, S, and then we can actually just drag our mouse through that. And And we can kind of watch this animation just by sliding through the time slider. Remember, by playing it, it's going to play every frame very fastly or very quickly, and it's not going to give you the real feel of 24 frames a second or 30 frames a second, because this would roughly be almost 5 seconds. But if I click play, that's not going to be 5 seconds. It's going to skip through that much quicker, so the animation is going to look much quicker. But if you just want to get a sense of what's going on, you can always just slide right through the time slider, and you can just see some of those basic animations. So anyways, guys, I just wanted to give you kind of a quick reminder and overview on a few things, and just kind of take another level or a deeper look at the outliner and how parenting things can be utilized for more than just keeping things organized, which is great for that. But you can also use that organization and parent to child. So this would be our top parent, even, and we can move the group around, right? So this would be our top parent, our next parent, but this would be a child of that parent. This is a child of that parent. So it's kind of almost like a family tree look to this. Anyway, yeah, so that's just a look at that. And there's much more that you could do with this, because they don't need to all necessarily be organized in a linear fashion. We could actually drag this 11 up to 1, and now we have a different now our animation is already set like it is, but this would give us a totally different animation and look if we started doing things again. So I just showed you everything in a very linear fashion, but you could break this out into a bunch of different looks and feels, and things would behave very differently. So it's something that you can explore with and play around with a little bit more. But I just kind of wanted to open that door so you knew what is there and some of the things that you can potentially do. So that's parent and child, and some basic organization in our outliner, and how we can start to utilize that as a tool. Okay, so we are going to also look at basic lighting and rendering. I always think that since these are primitives at their purest form, those are like super sharp edges. I always think that beveling is always a really good option. So let's look real quick at how we might add a little bit of beveling and a little bit of softness to these super sharp edges. So up here, making sure we're in modeling, if we go to Edit Mesh, and let's on Bevel, let's go over to the square, and let's put that width, I'm kind of taking a guess here, but let's put it at 0.1. And what I'm doing right now is I've actually just got this last P-Cube 26 selected. So I'm just going to hit Bevel, and actually I'm going to undo that. So I'm going to hit Control Z. Let's go back to Edit Mesh and bevel the square again. Edit Mesh, the square next to bevel. I think 0.1 is still a little big, so I'm going to put 0.025 and bevel. So that just gives us just a little softness. I don't know if you can really see it. Now again, I told you guys in this last class, right now as I rotate, I'm actually rotating around this pivot over here, but I'm wanting a closer look at this square, and as I rotate, I'm not really getting a very good look at it. I have to move around and try to find it again, and that can be a pain. So letter F as in Frank will frame whatever you have selected up in your viewport. So that's just going to allow me to get a closer look, and as I rotate now, I am right around that object that I'm looking at. We could add more segments to even make this softer, like another line through there and all that sort of stuff. I don't want to do all that right now. I just want to give you guys just the basics right now. So, okay, so we have a little bit of softness on these edges. Up here, I would like to see our our polygons. So I'm just going to click this wireframe at the top of my viewport on shaded, just so I can see the wireframes as well. That just kind of gives me kind of a better look at what's going on with the geometry. So then I'm just going to, what I'm going to do here is I'm just going to click right up the line. So I'm going to click, and I'm going to use my outliner for this. So this is another thing the outliner can be really handy for. So I'm going to click P cube 25, and if you guys remember, the very last thing that we did as a function from up here was to bevel this piece. Well, Maya remembers what that last function was, and it's saved in memory. The 0.025 that we put on that is saved in memory. So if we go right up the line here, I click P cube 25. On my keyboard, I can hit G as in goat or G as in God. So G, and you're going to see it did the exact same thing to P cube 24. So really, to do this very quickly, one of the things I can do is just go to P cube 23 and just hit G, 22G, 21G, 20G, 19G, 18G, 17G, 16G, 15G, 14G, 13G, 12G, and so on. So I'm just going to keep doing that until I get to the beginning, which once you have that command in memory, that's much faster than having to go through. Did I get P cube 24? G? Yeah. Looks like I skipped it when I was going through. But that's much faster than going to P cube 24, up here to edit mesh, over here to bevel and the square, and then making sure that we're clicking bevel, and then going to 23, edit mesh. Actually, now that we've set things in the square, you could just click that. That'd be a little bit faster, edit mesh, bevel, and so on. But using the G on the keyboard is so much faster. It's another just one of those dirty quick techniques, so that just kind of help things go quicker. Now I'm actually rotating kind of still around this piece, so I kind of want to be back at the center. So I'm just going to click P cube 1 because I know that's still at the very center, and I'm just going to hit F or F in here. So making sure that my mouse is in the viewport and F, and that will actually frame me back up. Just about framing me up right about there. Or I guess I could do that, the actual parent, because you can see our pivot point for our group is right there. So if I hit F, that will actually frame me up on that. So, okay. So, yeah, that's actually taking me to, I really don't even know where that's taking me. So, go back to P cube 1, hit F, and yeah, we're close enough. So, one last thing before we get to lighting and rendering, because this is another thing that you could do when you're parenting these things up. Each one of these cubes, if I click on a cube, you're going to see that my translation tool goes right to where that cube is. So if I click on that cube or that cube, the translation tool goes right to the center of that cube. But we don't have to scale or rotate from the center of an object. We can actually move our pivot point. So if I click Cube Parents and I click Insert on the keyboard, I can actually move that pivot point around. And then if I hit Insert again, I could then rotate everything around that. Don't worry about that too much. It can be a pretty helpful tool, though, when you're trying to change pivot points, or you're trying to snap pivot points, or say you have this cube and the pivot point is over here and you want it over there. Well, you can snap that pivot point to there. We'll talk more about that. I don't want to dive too deep into that right at this moment, especially on a video, because it's a little harder to address, like if there's any questions or anything like that. I just want to throw that out there so that you guys know that you can do that. So I'm just going to move that back. Don't worry about what I'm doing right now. I'm just going to move this back. Actually, I want that to the very center. Don't worry about all these. These are just snapping tools. But we can talk more about all that sort of stuff later. Okay, so again, we still have that animation through here. Okay, so what about some basic lighting and rendering? We've talked about this a little bit, but I think it's good to put it in a video too, just so you guys have it as a reference. So Maya now thankfully ships with the Arnold render, so we will use the Arnold render for this. So I'm going to click Arnold. I'm going to come down here to lights, and there's all these different lights that we can use. If we get time, I'll try to go through all of them one by one, just so you guys have an idea. But right now, I'm just going to have us use a physical skylight because it gives us global lighting from the sky and sun, and it's very physically accurate. That's why they call it a physical skylight. So it's great for, it's what you would really want to use for outdoor type shots. Some of these other ones you might want to use like for interior shots and things like this. But this is a great one just to really get familiar with. It calculates all the bounces because light bounces and diffuses through the sky, so it's very physically accurate. So it's a great tool and a great lighting resource. So we're going to click the physical sky, and you're going to see out here it kind of drops this dome on us. The problem is if I render right now, I will see the sky. And just a review of the clapboards up here again. That you're going to really just want to be familiar right now with two clapboards. You're going to be familiar with the clapboard right here that has nothing over it, and then the clapboard over here that has the render settings. So the one with the little gear and the one with nothing on it. The other thing that you're going to want to be familiar with is the hypershade. So I'm just going to select and click on the hypershade because we're going to make a very quick material for our cubes. So I'm going to click and open the hypershade. Since we are using Arnold, I'm just going to want to come down here, over here where Arnold is, and I just want to click on the word shader that's right under Arnold. And we're going to use that AI standard surface, and that's going to be a great tool to use for our P-cubes. So I'm just going to drag my outliner over a little bit. I'm going to click P-cube 1. Shift select the very last P-cube, and with all of those selected, I'm going to come over here. I'm going to right click and hold. Oops, we lost it. Sorry about that. Click P-cube 1, shift select P-cube 6, and over here right click and hold. I'll get this menu, and we just want to choose this top option, which is assign material to viewport selection. So that's actually just going to put that material on there. I know we've talked a little bit about that material, but right now I'm just going to come over here and I'm going to click that little minus sign, and I'm just going to click off to the side and get our selection tool so we're not moving anything around accidentally. And if we use that clapper that I just pointed out a second ago that doesn't have anything on it, it's just going to take a render of our current frame. So it's going to show us what things look like. So I'm just going to click that real quick, and we can see all these cubes, and we can see the sky. So let's get rid of this. We still want the sky to be lighting things, but if I come over here and I click, so I have my color right here, and I have my alpha channel right here, where there really is not an alpha channel. So we need to turn off, and I'm going to click RGB again. We just want to use the sky as lighting, but I don't want it to be actually rendered. So the way we do that, we click on this dome over here. Over here to the right, if we come to Attribute Editor, we'll get our AI Sky Dome Light. We just want to make sure that we're in the AI Sky Dome Light Shape 1. And if we come down, we just scroll down, or take this bar, we should come to Visibility and Camera. And if we just take that slider, or if we just type 0 in there, that's going to turn off the primary visibility. It's still acting as a light, and it's still doing everything else, but it's not going to be visible in our render. There's some really cool stuff. You can see we're getting all those light bounces there. But here, let's go ahead and just click our clear render clapper here, and we'll get that same render, but now the sky's no longer in here. Now if I go to check my alpha channel, I actually have an alpha channel. So you can see just the cubes are white and everything else is black, which is great. That's great for After Effects, because After Effects will see that. So I'm just going to click back on RGB. So these two just take you kind of back and forth. Okay. Also, just know too, it's always kind of hard when I'm doing the video to just know that I'll at next class period, if you guys have any questions about any of this, we can re-review and I can answer any questions and things like that too. So the last thing to look at, so we looked at lighting up or setting up lighting, getting a basic render to just see what things look like. But let's look real quick at setting up renders for export. So once we have things set up and we're ready to render our environment or our character turntable, all of this is going to apply. So this is where we're going to use that clapper with the gear. We're going to click on that. We're going to want to make sure that this render using is set to the Arnold render. It's set like that to default, but just know there's other renderers even that you can buy, and you can set what you want to use there. We're just going to go down. I'm not even going to touch on any of these other tabs. We're just going to go straight down the common. EXR is fine, or TIFF is fine. Deep EXR is awesome, but we're not going to be using that right now. So I'm going to keep it at EXR. Down here, we want to change this from name.extension, because if we set up a whole render sequence and say, I think this question came up in class last time, if we render out 120 frames and we go to our render folder, well, if it's set like this, there's only going to be one image in there, and that's going to really stink. And the reason why, as it goes through the animation, it's going to render frame 1, and it's going to name it whatever our file is named. So this is ICAP2. It's going to name it ICAP2. And that would be frame 1. Well, then it's going to jump to frame 2. It's going to render and save it and overwrite that file. And then it's going to go to frame 3, render and save it and overwrite that file. So at the very end, we'll get the very last frame rendered and saved, and that's all we're going to have. So to avoid that from happening, we really want to make sure that we change this to name.pound.extension. So now we would get ICAP2 dot whatever the frame number is, and then the extension is the EXR, the TIFF, or whatever you're using. So right now, the way this is going to render out, this is the name of my file, so it's going to be ICAP2.1.exr. Then it's going to go to frame 2, and it's going to be ICAP2.2.exr. And so we're going to get all of our frames, and then After Effects can import all of that as a render sequence, and we'll see it as an animation. So just make sure again that you set that to name.pound.extension. Frame padding, that's just like how many zeros are before the one. So this would actually be name.pound. I believe it's 3 zeros. I think the fourth one is the actual number. So that would be name.pound 00. Wait, name.pound.0001.exr. That would be name.pound.0002.exr. Anyways, I know that's all kind of technical, but it is important, and it's good for you guys to be familiar with that. We're not going to mess with color space. That is important, but that's a topic for another day. And in fact, we won't be discussing that at all in ICAP. We're just going to be using our basic render settings. Okay, so let's jump on down. Right now, this is only set to render from frame 1 to frame 10. Well, I've got 120 frames, so I want to set that to that last frame to 120. But keep in mind, if I'm rendering and mine's going along and it crashes at frame 55, well, if I have to pick things back up, I may not want to render all the way starting again at frame 1. I could start this back up at frame 55. So keep that in mind too. So you can change the start frame as well. Usually speaking, especially with low stuff like this, Maya's probably not going to crash, but when your scenes get bigger, it could. And then you just check your images and see what image you last left off on, and then you can set that accordingly. So, but for right now, I want 1 to frame 120, so I just want to make sure that's 1 to 120. This would be where we would set up our render camera. So if we had a different camera over here, so if we had another camera that we were rendering under, for example, I could set this, hold on, let me close out, come back in, there. And now you can see that camera is there to be selected as well. So I could select that camera and say, I want you to render the scene from this camera. Next thing is our width and our height. So this is our actual dimensions that we're getting, how many pixels that we're getting. There are some presets, so if I click right here, I can actually go down and select that HD 1080, and you can see it's selected, or it set the width to 1920 and the height to 1080. That's pretty standard, so keep that in mind. Next thing to point out, I think that's pretty much it. We've got our frame type selected, and just remember, if you want to see an alpha channel, you just got to select a format that will show alpha channels. EXRs, TIFFs, PNGs will show alpha channels, JPEGs will not. So EXRs or TIFFs are always good options. Name.pound.extension, we set our frames correctly, and then we set the render cam that we want to see out of. So you could render out of your perspective. That's fine. Just know that you want to render out of what you're wanting to render out of. I believe we're in our render cam. Yeah. And then we set our image size. So from here we're good. We can actually X out of this. I'm going to show one last thing before I show how to render, because the problem is I don't know what the render camera is seeing, like how much of this screen is inside the camera. So I'm looking through my render camera right now because I've gone to panels perspective and I've selected it. You can also select it other ways, but that's just a good way. Panels perspective render camera. But the problem is I don't know what all is inside the render camera, so that's good to know. If I make sure that my render camera is selected, so we're not selecting on something else, make sure that render camera is selected, and then over here making sure that we're on the attribute editor, I can come over to the render cam shape tab and open that up. And this is really cool. I mean, this is like a real camera, so you can set, any of you that are really familiar with cameras and focal lengths and all that sort of stuff, you can change the focal length and get some very different looks based on the focal length of your camera. So I'm just going to leave it at the basic 35 that it's set at, but that's something to know. But I'm going to scroll all the way down until I see display options, and I'm just going to open that up. So it should be closed, so as I scroll down, I'm going to come down and I'm going to see this display options, and I'm going to open that up, and there's this little checkbox next to display resolution. Well, we set our resolution over here to the 1920 by 1080. So this is going to set that to that display resolution and show us what is in frame for that camera. So if I click that checkbox, you can see what is in frame for the camera. The problem is it looks like it's going off to the side a little bit, and I still can't quite tell. So if I scroll down a little bit further, I'm going to see this overscan, and I can set that to say maybe 1.5, and I can kind of actually zoom out my view, not the camera's view, just my view of the overall scene, and I can see here what the camera sees. So all this gray, and I can actually change the color of that to whatever I want, or I could just black it completely. Well, maybe we don't want black. Let's go back to that gray. And this gate mask opacity will actually set like if I can see outside of that or not. So I can actually turn the opacity of all that off, and we can just see the outline. But I do think it's kind of good to have up a little bit, just so you know. But here I can really see what the camera sees, so I can really start to set up my shot and know what exactly is going to be rendered out of Maya, and exactly what my image sequence that I render out is going to look like, what's in frame and what's not in frame. There's more. I'm not going to get into all the video stuff and safe stuff right now, but just know, for those of you that are familiar with your, terms like lower thirds and things like that that you might have learned in different video classes, all that still applies, and you can utilize some of this stuff for some of that. But I don't want you guys to worry about, if you're not familiar with that, don't worry about that right now. Just know that you want to click this display resolution, and that you can set your overscan a little bit so you can see what's outside of the frame, because when we're zoomed in too much, it's really hard to tell what's getting clipped and what's not. So zooming back can be a little helpful. Okay, so last thing, and that is how to do a render sequence. So over here we've been in our modeling tabs, which, remember, affects what we have up top here. So this is all set to different modeling menus. But now we want to change that to rendering. So we're going to click right here on the word modeling and go down to rendering, and now we have all these different menus. And since we've set everything, we've set our frame rates 1 to 120 and our aspect ratio, this is good to render. So we could, at this point, and I always do, just before I render, I just do a quick render just to make sure things are all working and that something funky doesn't happen. So I just did that clear clapper just to make sure that I'm getting a still frame that looks like what I'm thinking it should look like. And then once I've clicked that, just to double check, I can go to render. I believe the batch render, even for the student version, watermarks your versions. So I would encourage you, unless you bought Arnold, then it won't watermark it. You're going to need to use the render sequence. So, but being that this is all set up, if I click this right now, this is going to render this whole render animation from that camera angle. So anyways, that's a quick introduction on how to use the outliner, a little more advanced than what we've looked at in the past, how to set things up from parent to child and so forth, how to set up some quick basic lighting, how to go into our render settings and how to set all of that up, how to double check things, how to set up a camera, also the camera to be utilized in our render sequence and our render settings. So we set up lighting. We looked at how we can use our attribute editor to put some things in place so we can see exactly what our camera is seeing. So yeah, I know we've covered a lot, but I think it's also good for this to also be on a video, so you guys have this to reference back to. So we'll definitely make sure that that's available to you. So I believe Ed gave you guys the last one. If he can't do that again, I'll just make sure that I upload it to YouTube and you guys have a link for that. So anyway, I hope this has been helpful, and and it has allowed you guys to look a little deeper into Maya and how to do some basic rendering and set up lighting and all that sort of stuff. So, alright guys, well, last reminder is we do have our advanced logo due next week by the end of class, so we'll make some time if you need in class to make sure that everybody can get that submitted by the time you guys leave. For those of you that were not there, I'll be sending out another video in regard to that, so you can look at that. But again, we'll cover it in class. So anyway, guys, have a great week, and thanks Ed for helping out this week. All right.